Hello and welcome to Getting Naked with Happiness with me, Stephen Liu. Each episode, my guests will share personal stories of resilience and bear their emotions and minds openly. Learn from the wisdoms that they have gained through their journeys and create your very own well-being toolkit. Today, I'll be chatting with my guest, Dr. Karen Temple. Karen has a unique vantage point from around 15 plus years of experience working with next generation technology companies from startup ventures to large corporations. And she also believes at the fundamental level that everyone's purpose and your purpose is to be you in the best version possible. And that to go far, we go with one another. That means acting and behaving from the foundation of human centric principles. By being transparent, curious, we can align with each other's jet streams and do magical things together. So please join me to welcome Karen. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Stephen, I am so delighted to be here, and I'm looking forward to getting naked with happiness with you and the listeners.
Yes. And tell us a story of a time in your journey that you have experienced some sort of stuckness or setback, and what have you learned from it?
Yeah. So one of the guarantees in life is that we're going to have struggles, and
Yes.
how we experience our struggles and the struggles that we have, I think, are unique to every human being. Because it's not just that one person experiences X, they may be greatly affected by it and it might produce some trauma. Another person, maybe it won't. And so recognizing that we're all so uniquely and beautifully made and how we experience the world is unique. So in my particular case, that I'll share with you, where I got really stuck for a number of years, was I became depressed as a young teenage girl. And that was a really hard time in my life because I remember feeling like the world just became so distant. My friends were no longer close, even though they might have been physically close to me. I felt like I was in a bubble. I felt as though I couldn't hear properly. I didn't want to eat. I couldn't wake up. And this was so opposite how I normally am. So my parents didn't, like my mother saw, my father was confused. He didn't understand. But I'm really blessed in having a very beautiful and very patient mother. My grandmother always says that my mother has the patience of an angel, and I think she's right on there. And so when I got stuck, I just really disassociated. But what my mother always did was she always just stayed nearby. She always held space for me. She would just sit, not necessarily saying anything to me. But at those moments where all of a sudden something would bubble up from inside and I could express what I was feeling, she would acknowledge it. She didn't try to fix me. She didn't try to make me better. She respected what I was feeling. And I was doing crazy stuff, Stephen. Like I would sit in my closet for hours on end. I felt as though I was out of my body in so many ways, and it was disturbing to me. And so by putting myself in this very tiny space, I felt like, okay, I can contain myself. And I would just sit there and try to fall asleep. And my mom knew, but she didn't say, hey, you can't do that. You have to come out. You have to be in the sunlight. She just said, okay. And she would just check on me. And periodically she would bring me cookies and milk, for example. And so during that process, she also got me help. So I actually went to see a professional healthcare provider because she realized this was more than a stage or a phase, so to speak. And then she just continued to get me the right support and also hold space with me. And fortunately, through getting professional help, I was able to come out the other end. I remember beginning to feel that I was starting to feel myself again. And I think through that experience, I just have a huge amount of respect for what other people are experiencing. That it's not what I think they should or shouldn't be feeling. I've learned through my experiences what it means just to come beside somebody and hold space. and not judge. And I think that emanates from me, and I think that's one of the reasons why people feel attracted to me, and why sometimes I have strangers just come and pour their soul to me, which is a blessing. It's a gift, and I'm very respectful of that, because it's not easy for people to speak. Most of us, we're very private. We have certain things that we're willing to share and not share. And so having this gift, I really cherish it, and I hold that person in confidence that what they're sharing with me is for my privilege, and that they know that this is not going to go anywhere.
How do you know that you were actually depressed? And what were some of those thoughts and emotions that you experienced at that point?
Yeah. So I wasn't aware.
Okay.
I was just very confused and very sad. But my mother was aware, fortunately. And she saw that I wasn't eating. She saw that I would burst into tears. She saw that her little girl, who normally is happy, wakes up, goes to school, isn't getting out of bed. And so it was more my mother and her discernment that made her realize that this isn't a phase. This isn't just feeling down and depressed. And she would ask gentle questions, whether or not something happened at school, how are my friends, and by just gently peeling back the onion, she realized, okay, there wasn't anything that triggered this. It wasn't that something happened. There's something else going on. And I also think through the education, it's really important to have education around mental illness and psychological well-being. And I think because of the awareness, her awareness of it, she was able to, at some point, have conversations with my dad, who didn't get it, and say, we need to find help for her. And so we went to our family doctor, and it led from there. I think now, in looking back, it was those really strong feelings of lethargy, not hungry, not wanting to engage in life, feeling separate from myself, feeling in a bubble, that were descriptions that allowed my mom to say, okay, this doesn't feel like a phase, versus times when my boat would get rocked in the sea of life. And, if I was dating and broke up with a boyfriend, for instance, and you feel sad, you feel down, but that's different. And you're able to lean on those coping skills that are a learned behavior. And I think it's important for everybody to learn resilience and coping, which is one of the reasons why I'm so thrilled about your podcast and what you're doing, because they don't teach this thing. They don't teach us to be aware and to discern the differences between being down and out and being clinically depressed. And I think there is a difference. And I think on one hand, we can take that ownership of learning skills to help ourselves and to help other people. And then there's a clinical side where it's very difficult to help ourselves. And we shouldn't be made to feel responsible and accountable for fixing ourselves, because we're in a different realm, and there we need professional help.
What were some of your thoughts about being labeled a person with depression? They are being imprisoned by the emotion of shame to stop them from sharing or speaking up. I want to ask that because what were some of the strengths that you might have tapped on to become so authentic and open?
Right. So it was interesting, because when I was coming out of being depressed when I was a young girl, I remember somebody saying to me, labeling me and saying, well, this is who you are. You are somebody who suffers from mental illness, and you're somebody who suffers from depression. And I remember thinking, no, don't label me. I didn't like the thought of being labeled, because it felt as though I was going to be defined by a state that wasn't enjoyable, that was tough. And instead of saying, let's see where life goes, when we identify with a label, I am depressed, or I am a negative thing, it becomes our identity. And we are so much more than one single thing. So instead, I suffered from depression, but I'm not weaker because of that, right? I'm a resilient person who has a mental illness, who had a mental illness. I've been blessed even, right? Because in addition to mental illness, I also suffer from Crohn's disease. And that's a bit more recurring. And so I do have Crohn's disease, but I'm not Crohn's. I'm Karen. I have so many gifts and beauty, and I also have some crazy stuff too, but this is who I am. So when people label themselves, I always encourage us, let's label a noun that's not us, right? Like, I'm not a bad person. I may have done something bad. Let's say I lied. I'm not a liar, but I lied, right? That was a bad thing to do, but that doesn't make me a liar unless I assume that identity and I'm constantly lying. So I think there's a differentiation. I think it's powerful.
I am very keen to follow up with a couple of questions about your depression. Was that a situation that made you depressed, or was it a progressive thing that happened to you? Or could you share a little bit about that? If you are?
I'm not sure there wasn't an episode that triggered it. Okay. I just remember like walking through a fog. It just got thicker and thicker and thicker. When I was depressed, there were some other things that happened that put me in a tailspin. But by then I was also with professional help. So that helped tremendously. But it wasn't an event that triggered it. And I often think in life where there's not a event that triggers something, you almost don't realize it's happening. And you begin to wonder, is this normal? And that's tough. And I think that's true for anything in life. For example, if I think about stressful situations where I'm in a bad work environment, and at first you're like, okay, I can do this. I can make this work, right? And before you know it, it's so bad and that becomes norm. Rather than something inside saying, wait a second here. No, I'm out. I'm making a choice that this is not healthy and I'm going to move on. And so I think choices are really important and ownership are important. But again, I really distinguish between clinical mental illness, where we need help, and psychological well-being, where we have the opportunity and the choice to become more resilient through coping mechanisms and other forms of intervention.
Talking about coping mechanism and other sort of interventions related to psychological well-being, what are some of the thoughts about overcoming suffering and developing resilience? And how are all these connected to your personal mission of well-being or happiness?
Sure. So again, differentiating with clinical mental illness. Okay. So I'm going to talk about psychological well-being. I feel that in life we feel tension, we feel anxiety when there's a mismatch between our values and our actions and behavior. When we talk about values, we talk about our integrity, we talk about doing what we said we're going to do, we talk about respecting one another. But often how we say our values are and often how we act and behave are not always congruent. When you don't have congruency, there's tension. I think being very clear on what are our values is so important, because when you're faced with a fork in the road, a situation involving other humans in particular, where you want X or Y, but you should go left or right, but there's tension. Hold on to the rudder that is your values, and that will steer you in the right direction. Even if it's not what you want to do, or it's tough, or it's hard, or you don't feel like showing up in that way, it will serve you in the long run. So that's one thing. The other thing is recognizing your habits, because habits are like exercises. You need to lean on them when you need them. And when you need them, they have to be in your back pocket. You can't be going to that book and saying, okay, what's that habit that I need at this moment? You need to pull it out. And so having these habits and doing that extra thing. So it's like going to the gym. You do, 3 sets of 10 reps. No, you do 12. just that little more. And it's the same thing. And I always say to people that it's the smallest things that make the biggest difference. I once had somebody say, "Oh, but I'm always there when you really need me." Well, sure, everyone's going to jump to the rescue when a tragedy appears. But where are we on a day-to-day in part of our life? Do we come home to our family and have we given everything to our work that our family gets our leftovers? Or do we enter that door, find the energy within, and show them joy, show them love, look at the kids in their eyes and help them to be seen, to express themselves, to feel your love? We're tired at the end of the day. We don't always feel like doing it. But by working that habit, you stay true to your values. And in the long run, I think when we show up in other people's lives, that is one of the biggest sources of happiness. It's not all about us and what somebody else can do to make me happy. But when I'm feeling down, as my grandma always told me, go out and help somebody. It's the fastest way to feel happy again.
I really love what you just said, and having these habits are so important. And going out to help somebody taps on our compassionate instinct to connect ourselves to other people. And on that note, I am very curious to ask, what brings you the joy in the work that you do? I have to.
Oh my goodness. Well, there's, again, people are kaleidoscopes. And so there's so many facets to work. When I work with technology experts, I work with some incredibly brilliant people who really want to change the world. I mean, these are people who are trying to develop new medicines. They're trying to solve climate change, for example. They are trying to make our world safer, better places. And they're really capable of what they're doing in terms of a research. So I love taking those high-performing people and saying, okay, how can we further validate this technology? How can we bring in an industry partner to be able to potentially partner with you? Or in the case of a venture, how can we build out this venture so that you can actually show that your technology can solve this problem? So I love being able to bring the breadth of experience that I have, because I can understand the technology well enough. I don't need to be the expert, but I know enough about product, market, and how industry works that I can really bring a perspective that is valuable to them. So I love doing that. The other thing that I really love is the human element to my work. At the end of the day, as I've said, problems can be solved. But if we can bring the right people around and manage those relationships, then we can do magical things. And we can all go to the moon together. And so really at the end of the day, I believe that I want to help people be all that they can be in this life. Take their unique skills and talents and go all in. And I also believe that we can only do that by going with one another. And when we bring all of ourselves to the table and pour ourselves into a common mission, not just in terms of the tangibles of what we're trying to achieve, say a new drug to cure cancer, but we're actually bringing our hearts together, our souls together, and our minds together. All of a sudden now you have human connectedness. And when you do that, you're pouring into one another in a professional environment, you pour into one another in a work environment, and that transcends your being. Because that person where you role modeled good leadership behavior, when they become a leader, they're going to pass it on. The child that you pour love into is going to have that love in their heart when you're no longer here, and is going to love on their babies like you loved on them. And it is going to go through the generations. What else is success in life other than that? And so each time I interact with a human, I'm trying to bring my best self and to pour in them love and respect for who they are, all their quirks and quirks. And there are people out there, don't get me wrong, that drive me absolutely bonkers. And sometimes I need to say, you're driving me bonkers. But they need to be who they need to be as well. And they have to have responsibility for who they are. I can't own that. And so through this interaction, this is where the magic of life happens. It's through our relationships, is what I believe.
I absolutely love what you just mentioned, tapping onto love and building relationships and building a community that we can grow in this human connectedness. I think that that's the most powerful thing ever. And on that, I know that you have a podcast called Build Out One Another. Can you share a little bit more about what you're setting out to achieve in this podcast?
Yeah. So the Build Up One Another podcast is my creative side coming through in my professional capacity as coach consultant to technology ventures and researchers. I'm often a right-hand person to somebody, which is a role that I don't mind playing. I don't have to be front and center stage. The podcast is where my more creative side comes out and where I can really be centrally focused on what I believe is one of my missions in life, which is to share this notion that our relationship with ourselves, to be all you can be, and that our relationships with one another are what build longevity and happiness in life. There's a lot of work out there, a lot of really great content on how to be all you can be, and what does that look like and feel like. But I often think what's missing is that if you take any famous person, any person who's really knocked the socks of whatever it is that they're doing, they will always say there were other people who were there on the sidelines, who were there in the arena when the going got tough, the part of that struggle that isn't always public. And so I want people to realize, especially young women, that we're not, this notion that we can have it all, do it all, and do it all on our own is not serving us, and I don't think it serves anybody. So in particular, I want to open this conversation to bring on people who've accomplished amazing things, that they can share and unpack the stories of the key relationships in their lives, the behind the scenes things that happened that impacted who they became and where they went, so that we begin to understand the subtleties, because we're talking subtleties here, relationships, right? How subjective is that compared to most of my world, which is scientific and very objective based? What makes a good relationship? How do we start putting practical and unexpected ways to nurture your allies, to navigate those adversaries from a really principled perspective? Because I really believe that when we're able to do that, you can unlock enormous beauty and joy in your life and in the lives of others.
Unpacking and unlocking beauty and enjoyment for others. I think this is a great piece of advice I received, and I love your mission, Karen. And Karen, before we close the show, I would like to ask, can you share a quick life advice to those who are in their 20s, if you can?
So just heads up to your listeners, you might not like this, but it's not all about you, right?
It's not about you.
It's not all about you, okay? The first third of our life, we are all about ourselves, right? We're figuring out who we are, who we're meant to be, where we're meant to go, where we're supposed to work, and that's natural, okay? I'm not saying that is part of life's journey, figuring out your purpose. If we fast forward to the last third of your life, where your journey is meeting its end, you no longer have time to run that ultra marathon, get that promotion, whatever it may be. At that moment in time, when we speak to older people, and I love old people, they're so wise, it becomes the relationships with one another that becomes so central, because they realize that when they're gone, will people still talk about them? And more importantly, will some nuggets of wisdom and value that they gave to that person help that person? So now you're left with the middle phase, which is from 20 to about 60. The sooner you realize that it's not all about you, the sooner you realize that ultimately it's about your relationships and the richness of those relationships, the sooner when you're at the end of your journey, and God willing, you have a beautiful and long journey, but when you're there, you can go with peace. And so that's what I want young people to realize. And also, when you realize that, you will go far. All your dreams may come true then. If you try to go all on your own and it's all about you, maybe the journey might be a bit shorter.
Yep.
In terms of depth, not in terms of length. I pray everybody has a long and beautiful and healthy life.
Oh, that's nice. And I really like the part about it's not about you. Karen, I would like to acknowledge your your mission to spreading the message of building trust, collaboration by developing each other up. For those who are listening in and for those people who are keen to follow you, is there a certain way that they can reach out to you? Can you share with us how to do so?
Sure, absolutely. So I can be found on LinkedIn under Karen Temple, also on Instagram at Build Up One Another, and then also on wherever you get your podcast. The podcast is on a number of platforms and it's under Build Up One Another.
Build up one another. Thank you for being on the show, Karen.
Thank you, Stephen. This has been absolutely delightful, and I hope that it serves you and your mission and all your listeners.
Yes, and I am so grateful that you have shared all this. For me, my biggest takeaway from this conversation would be maybe one action I will do after this conversation is to focus and build up positive habits. And because if we go to a time of challenge, we can always go back to these positive habits. And of course, the key important word following that would be human-centric connection. Focus on my relationships, focus on people that we cherish and build them up. For those who are listening in, I would like to hear your thoughts on how you can increase trust or to develop better relationships and collaboration to have better human-centric connection. To share your comments in Facebook page, Getting Naked with Happiness, or Instagram, hashtag Getting Naked with Happiness. And thank you, Karen, for being here. And
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and have a great week of fun, positive human connections and fulfillment ahead.